The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Edmund Burke. The smell of burning rubber, a woman's body limp on the asphalt, blood in her mouth, and Marcus Thornton's hands, still trembling, covered in her blood. He had just saved her life. But the man walking toward him with handcuffs didn't see a hero, he saw a criminal. If stories like this move you, consider subscribing. Your support helps us bring these forgotten voices to light. Like and follow for more true stories of injustice and courage. October 10th, 2017. Started like any other Tuesday for Marcus Thornton. The Georgia sun hung low over Pike County, casting long shadows across the two-lane highway that cut through farmland and pine forests. Marcus was 62 years old, retired from the fire department for nearly a decade, but some instincts never fade. The way he scanned traffic ahead, the way his foot hovered over the brake when he saw brake lights in the distance, the way his pulse quickened when something looked wrong. And that afternoon, something was very wrong. Marcus had spent 34 years as a firefighter and paramedic in Atlanta. He'd pulled people from burning buildings, performed CPR on countless victims, and seen more death than most people could imagine. But those 3 decades had carved deep scars: the apartment fire where a child died in his arms, the warehouse collapse that killed 3 of his brothers, the accumulating weight of losses that finally broke him by 2008. His body and mind had reached their limit. The nightmares were constant. Every siren sent his heart racing. Sarah begged him to retire before the job took everything from him. And finally, after 34 years of running toward danger, Marcus agreed. He moved to rural Georgia, grew tomatoes, restored an old pickup truck. His hands, once trained for life or death moments, now spent their days covered in motor oil and garden soil. He told himself he was done saving lives, but some instincts are wired, too deep to ever truly fade. But on October 10th, those hands would be covered in blood again. Marcus was driving home from the hardware store, country music playing softly on the radio, when he saw the car ahead of him suddenly swerve. It wasn't a gentle drift. It was violent, erratic, the kind of movement that comes right before disaster. The vehicle, a silver sedan, veered off the road, clipped the guardrail, and began to roll. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of metal crunching and glass shattering echoed across the empty highway. Like thunder, Marcus's foot slammed on the brake. His truck skidded to a stop on the shoulder. His heart was already racing, adrenaline flooding his system in a way that felt both foreign and familiar. He hadn't felt this surge in years, but his body remembered. His hands moved on autopilot and buckle seatbelt, open door. Run. The sedan had come to rest upside down in a ditch about 50 yards ahead. Steam hissed from the engine. The windshield was shattered, spiderwebbed with cracks and streaked with blood. Marcus ran toward it, his boots pounding against the asphalt, his breath coming in sharp bursts. He could see movement inside the car. Someone was still alive. But here's the thing most people don't understand about emergencies. Time doesn't slow down. It speeds up. Every second becomes a decision, and every decision has consequences. When Marcus reached the wreck, he dropped to his knees beside the driver's side door. The car was resting at an awkward angle, the roof crushed inward, the door jammed shut. Through the broken window, he could see her, young woman, mid-20s, blonde hair matted with blood, her body twisted unnaturally in the driver's seat. Her eyes were half open but unfocused, her breathing shallow and wet-sounding. Blood trickled from her nose and mouth. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. He assessed her airway partially obstructed, breathing, circulation weak, pulse at the neck. She was in critical condition, and if he didn't act fast, she would die right there in that ditch. He tried the door. It wouldn't budge. The frame was bent, the hinges warped from the impact. He moved to the passenger side, where another bystander, a man in his 40s, had already stopped to help. Together, they pulled at the door with everything they had. It groaned, resisted, then finally gave way with a metallic shriek. Marcus climbed into the wreckage. The smell hit him, first gasoline, burned rubber, the metallic temps of blood. The woman was still strapped into her seatbelt, her body slumped forward. Her face was pale, lips turning blue. Marcus placed 2 fingers on her neck. Her pulse was fading, but this is where everything changed. This is where Marcus Thornton made the decision that would turn him from a retired hero into a man facing criminal charges. He reached in and unbuckled her seatbelt. Her body slumped into his arms, and he carefully pulled her out of the wreckage, laying her flat on the grass beside the road. She wasn't breathing. Her chest wasn't rising. Her eyes had rolled back. Marcus tilted her head back, cleared her airway with his fingers, blood, debris, fragments of teeth, and began CPR. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. His hands, scarred and calloused from years of work, pressed down on her sternum with the exact rhythm he'd learned decades ago. He could feel her ribs flexing under his palms, could hear the air moving in and out of her lungs with each rescue breath. But feeling confident and being confident are 2 different things. Marcus knew the statistics. He knew that even with perfect CPR technique, the survival rate for cardiac arrest outside a hospital was less than 10%. He knew that brain damage started after 4 minutes without oxygen. He knew that every second mattered, and that the woman beneath his hands was balanced on a razor's edge, between life and death. The compressions were exhausting. People who've never performed CPR don't understand the physical toll it's. Not like in the movies, where someone does a few gentle pushes and the victim gasps back to life. Real CPR requires force. You have to compress the chest at least 2 inches deep, hard enough to manually pump blood through a heart that stopped beating. Marcus's shoulders burned. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the blood on his hands. His back screamed in protest. He was 62 years old. Not the young firefighter who used to do this regularly. But he didn't stop between compressions. He checked for a pulse. Nothing. He checked her pupils, still dilated, unresponsive. He gave 2 more rescue breaths, watching her chest rise and fall artificially. The other bystander kept asking if he should do something, but Marcus barely heard him. His entire world had narrowed to this woman, to the rhythm of compressions, to the desperate hope that the next breath would be the one that brought her back. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 3. Marcus's arms were shaking now, fatigue setting in, but he kept going. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. He'd done this hundreds of times in his career, but each time felt like the first, the same desperate urgency. The same refusal to give up, the same prayer that this time, this person, would make it. And then she gasped. A wet, rattling sound that was the most beautiful thing Marcus had heard all year. Her chest rose on its own. Her eyes fluttered. She was breathing again. Marcus leaned back, his shirt soaked with sweat and blood. his hands still shaking from the adrenaline. He checked her pulse, stronger now, steadier. She was alive. She was going to make it, and that's when he heard the voice behind him. Step away from the vehicle, now. Marcus turned. A Georgia state trooper stood about 20 feet away, next to his patrol car. The officer's hand rested on his duty belt, his expression hard and unreadable. Marcus raised his hands slightly, the universal gesture of non-threat, and stood up slowly. "Officer, I'm a retired firefighter," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "This woman wasn't breathing. I just performed CPR. I said step away." Marcus didn't understand. He looked down at the woman, who was still lying on the ground, breathing shallowly but alive. Then he looked back at the officer. Something was wrong here, something that didn't make sense. The trooper walked past him and glanced at the woman, then turned his attention to Marcus's truck, still parked on the shoulder about 50 yards back. The engine was running. The driver's door was wide open. The vehicle was positioned at an angle, partially blocking the right lane of the highway. "Is that your vehicle?" the trooper asked. "Yes, but you're obstructing traffic." "Move it now." Marcus blinked. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The woman on the ground was still in critical condition. She needed medical attention immediately. An ambulance was on its way. He could hear the sirens in the distance, but until they arrived, someone needed to stay with her, monitor her breathing, keep her airway clear. "Officer, I can't leave her," Marcus said. "She could stop breathing again. I'm the only one here with medical training. I gave you an order." There was no room for negotiation in the trooper's voice. No acknowledgement of the life and death situation unfolding in front of him. Just cold, bureaucratic authority. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't how it worked. When someone's life was on the line, you didn't walk away. You didn't follow orders that put them at risk. But what happened next was something Marcus Thornton never expected, not in 34 years of emergency response, not in all his decades of public service. The trooper stepped forward, pulled out his handcuffs, and told Marcus to turn around. "You're under arrest for obstruction." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stood there, frozen, trying to process what was happening. Behind him, the woman he'd just saved was still struggling to breathe. In front of him, a uniformed officer was treating him like a criminal. "You can't be serious," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Turn around." "Hands behind your back." Marcus complied. What else could he do? The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, tight and unforgiving. The trooper read him his rights words Marcus had heard 1,000 times on TV, but never imagined would be directed at him. He was placed in the back of the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind him, his mind reeling. Through the window, he watched as the ambulance finally arrived. Paramedics rushed to the woman's side, checking her vitals, stabilizing her neck, loading her onto a stretcher. She was alive because of him. Her heart was beating because he'd refused to let her die. And now he was sitting in the back of a police car, arrested, but the nightmare was only beginning. The charges against Marcus Thornton were filed the next day: obstruction of a highway and failure to comply with a lawful order. The penalties were minor, misdemeanor, a fine, maybe a suspended sentence, but the damage to his reputation was immediate and devastating. The local news picked up the story within hours, but they didn't tell the full story. They didn't lead with the fact that Marcus had saved a woman's life. They led with the fact that a retired firefighter had been arrested at a crash scene. The headline read, former paramedic arrested after refusing police orders at accident site. The implication was clear. Marcus Thornton had done something wrong. The online comments came fast and brutal. People who didn't know him, who hadn't been there, who hadn't seen the woman's lifeless body or heard her gasping for air, they all had opinions. Some called him a glory hound, someone looking for attention. Others said he should have followed orders, that the trooper was just doing his job. A few even suggested that Marcus had been interfering with the rescue, that he'd made things worse. But then something unexpected happened. The narrative began to shift. Marcus's former colleagues from the Atlanta Fire Department started speaking out. Captain James Riley gave an interview, describing Marcus as one of the finest paramedics he'd ever known. Other firefighters shared stories. A petition demanding charges be dropped gathered over 50,000 signatures. Sarah became the unexpected face of his defense. She contacted every news outlet, telling the real story, that Marcus had performed CPR for nearly 4 minutes, that Rebecca had been clinically dead, that if he'd moved his truck as ordered, she would have died alone. "My husband spent his whole life running toward danger," Sarah said during one emotional interview. "And now they're punishing him for saving a life." The interview went viral. Suddenly, Marcus Thornton was a national conversation. But fame comes with a cost. Reporters camped outside their home. Marcus stopped answering the phone. The weight of public scrutiny was crushing him in ways firefighting never had. One night, Sarah found him in the garage, staring at his hands. "I keep thinking about all the people I couldn't save," Marcus said quietly. "And now, the one time it worked. This is what happens." Sarah sat beside him and didn't let go. But here's what most people didn't know. Rebecca Lyons survived. She was airlifted to Atlanta, where she underwent 7 hours of emergency surgery. Her injuries were catastrophic: fractured skull, collapsed lung, internal bleeding, but she survived. And when she woke up 3 days later, still groggy from sedation and barely able to speak, the first thing she asked the nurses was about the man who'd saved her life. Rebecca Lyons didn't remember the accident, just driving home, feeling dizzy, the steering wheel slipping, then darkness and pain. When she woke 3 days later, the first sensation was agony radiating from her chest and head. Her mother sat by the window, face drawn and exhausted. When their eyes met, her mother broke down. Rebecca learned the details slowly. The rollover, clinical death at the scene, the stranger who refused to let her die. Her father's voice cracked when he told her about Marcus Thornton, the retired firefighter who'd brought her back. "He's a hero," her father said, "and they arrested him." As Rebecca's strength returned, the injustice consumed her. Her brother Daniel, a lawyer in Atlanta, contacted Marcus's attorney and the district attorney's office, demanding answers. When he learned the state patrol was defending the arrest, his blood boiled. He told Rebecca everything. She was still weak, still recovering from surgery, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "I'm testifying," she said. Her mother protested Rebecca needed weeks more recovery, but Rebecca wouldn't hear it. "He saved my life. I'm not letting them punish him for it." When the doctors told her that a retired firefighter had pulled her from the wreckage and performed CPR until she started breathing again, she cried. When they told her the same man had been arrested, she couldn't believe it. Arrested. She whispered, her voice hoarse. "For what?" The nurse hesitated, then explained, "Obstruction of traffic. Failure to move his vehicle. Refusal to comply with a police officer's orders." Rebecca closed her eyes. She was alive because of Marcus Thornton. Her heart was beating, her lungs were working, her brain was intact because a stranger had refused to let her die. And the system had punished him for it. She made a decision right there in that hospital bed. She would testify. She would tell the truth. She would make sure the world knew what Marcus Thornton had done. The court date was set for early December, nearly 2 months after the incident. In that time, the story had grown beyond Pike County. National news outlets picked it up. Social media exploded with opinions. Some people called Marcus a hero. Others called him reckless. The Georgia State Patrol defended the trooper's actions, issuing a statement that the officer had acted within protocol and that public safety required compliance with lawful orders. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Bennett, told him the case would likely be dismissed. The evidence was overwhelmingly in his favor. Witness testimony, the 911 call logs, the paramedics' reports all confirmed that Marcus had saved Rebecca's life. But Claire also warned him that prosecutors sometimes pursued charges out of stubbornness, ego, or political pressure. They don't want to look like they made a mistake, she explained. So they'll push forward, hoping you'll take a plea deal. Marcus refused. He wouldn't plead guilty to saving someone's life. The weeks leading up to the trial were the longest of Marcus's life. He and Sarah met with Claire multiple times, reliving every detail. The constant replaying of those moments was reopening wounds he'd spent a decade trying to heal. His daughter, Emily, drove up from Savannah with her children the week before trial. But even as Marcus played with his grandchildren, his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the courtroom, about facing the trooper, about justifying an act of basic decency. The night before the hearing, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch in darkness, staring at stars. Sarah came out around midnight, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you did the right thing," she said softly. Marcus nodded, but he wasn't sure anymore. Nothing felt simple anymore. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse in Pike County was packed. Reporters lined the steps outside. Cameras flashed as Marcus and Sarah walked through the crowd, their heads down, refusing to engage. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only, and then, in a moment that would later be described as the turning point of the entire case, Rebecca Lyons walked in. She was still recovering her arm in a sling, a faint scar running along her temple, but she was alive, and she was determined when the judge called her to the stand. Rebecca spoke clearly and without hesitation. She described waking up in the hospital, learning what had happened, and realizing that Marcus Thornton had given her a second chance at life. Her voice wavered as she recounted the doctors telling her that she'd been clinically dead at the scene, that without immediate CPR she would have suffered irreversible brain damage or death within minutes. "The paramedics told my family that whoever performed CPR on me did everything right," Rebecca said, her eyes glistening. Perfect compression depth, perfect rhythm. They said it was textbook emergency response. She turned to look at Marcus, who sat at the defense table with his hands folded, his face impassive but his eyes red-rimmed. "Mr. Thornton didn't know me. He had no obligation to stop. He could have driven past, like I'm sure other people did, but he didn't. He pulled me from that car. He brought me back to life. And he stayed with me until help arrived." Then she looked directly at the prosecutor, her voice hardening. "If he hadn't been there, I'd be dead." The prosecutor, a young man in his 30s with carefully styled hair and an expensive suit, stood and attempted to redirect the testimony. He argued that while everyone appreciated Mr. Thornton's good intentions, the law was clear about obeying lawful orders from law enforcement. He pointed out that Marcus's vehicle had created a hazard on a busy highway, that emergency vehicles needed clear access, that the trooper had given multiple commands that were ignored, but Rebecca wouldn't let it go. "He saved my life," she repeated, her voice shaking with emotion now, anger mixing with gratitude. "And you arrested him for it. You put handcuffs on a man who was still covered in my blood. You treated him like a criminal when he was the only reason I'm alive to testify here today." The courtroom was silent. Even the prosecutor seemed momentarily at a loss for words. The judge, an older man with a weathered face and decades of experience, leaned forward. Judge Harold Morrison had presided over Pike County for 23 years. He'd seen murders, drug cases, domestic disputes, and every flavor of human tragedy and stupidity the legal system could produce. But this case had bothered him from the moment it appeared on his docket. He looked at the trooper, who sat ramrod straight in the witness section, and asked him to explain why he'd felt it necessary to arrest Marcus at the scene. The trooper's answer was mechanical, procedural. The vehicle was obstructing traffic. The defendant refused to comply. Protocol required enforcement of the law. There was no malice in his voice, no personal animosity, just the rigid adherence to rules that sometimes defines law enforcement culture. Judge Morrison let the silence stretch. He looked at the case file in front of him. Then he looked at Marcus Thornton, man who'd spent 34 years running into burning buildings to save strangers. Then at Rebecca Lyons alive, only because Marcus had refused to follow orders. Then at the packed courtroom full of people who had come to witness this absurd spectacle. "Case dismissed," he said. The courtroom erupted. People cheered. Rebecca Lyons broke down in tears. Marcus felt Sarah's hand squeeze his, and for the first time in 2 months. He allowed himself to breathe, but the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Thornton became a simpler reminder of what happens when bureaucracy collides with humanity, when protocol overrides common sense, when good people are punished for doing the right thing. The Georgia State Patrol quietly reassigned the trooper involved. No formal apology was ever issued, but the department updated its training materials to emphasize discretion in emergency situations. It wasn't much, but it was something. The case sparked a nationwide conversation about Good Samaritan laws and emergency response protocols. Legal scholars debated whether existing protections were sufficient. Medical professionals shared their own stories of being threatened with legal action for providing emergency care. Lawmakers in 3 states introduced bills to strengthen legal protections for people who render aid at accident scenes. Rebecca Lyons made a full recovery. She and Marcus stayed in touch, meeting for coffee occasionally. 2 people forever linked by a single moment on a Georgia highway. She told him once, over coffee, that she thought about that day often, about how close she'd come to dying, about how a stranger had refused to let that happen. But there was something else, she told him, something that stayed with Marcus long after their conversation ended. She'd been contacted by dozens of people, strangers who'd written to tell her they'd witnessed emergencies but had been too afraid to help, afraid of being sued, afraid of doing something wrong, afraid of becoming another Marcus Thornton, punished for trying to do good. How many people died because someone was too scared to help? Rebecca asked quietly. How many lives were lost because the system taught people that compassion is a liability? Marcus didn't have an answer, but the question haunted him. "You didn't just save my life," she said. "You reminded me what people are capable of." Marcus nodded, but didn't say much. He wasn't comfortable with praise, never had been. To him, what he'd done wasn't heroic, which was simply the right thing to do. And that, perhaps, was the most tragic part of the entire story. Because in a world where doing the right thing can get you arrested, where saving a life can make you a criminal, something fundamental has gone wrong. Marcus Thornton went back to his quiet life in Pike County. He still grew tomatoes. He still worked on his old truck. But every time he drove past that stretch of highway, he thought about Rebecca, about the moment her heart stopped, about the moment it started again, and he wondered how many other people out there were too afraid to act, too worried about the consequences, too convinced that the system would punish them for being brave. The handcuffs are gone now. The charges are dismissed. But the question remains, what would you have done? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Marcus should have been arrested? What would you have done in his place? Drop your opinion in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more true stories of injustice, courage, and the cost of doing what's right.